Jet Set Radio Future is the second and final game in the beloved Jet Set Radio series, and one of the most unique games you'll ever play. Set in the near future of 2024, the game is an alternate take on the original with an entirely new plot. It's a reboot as much as it is a sequel, a stranger and less talked about entry than the original, but one that deserves its place in the series nonetheless. The series has grown much bigger than the games, with a devoted following and several attempts at spiritual successors, as well as a long-lasting legacy. These games are cult classics in every sense of the term. Jet Set Radio fans are some of the most dedicated fans you'll find. The following might not be as big as more modern titles, but it contains so much passion, creativity, and love for the source material. Even to this day, you can feel the influence of the fanbase. You'll hear the music played on countless unrelated YouTube videos, and there are many games inspired either directly or indirectly by the series. These games are gems that you need to experience for yourself. While the original game saw a remaster in 2012, making it easily accessible on all major platforms, Future has always been a much more difficult game to play. Although previously the game was only playable on the original Xbox, the game is now playable on PC through the magic of emulation. Future isn't just a copy-paste sequel. In fact, it's quite ambitious, sometimes even to a fault. The sequel abandons the level select format for a pseudo-open world. Each level connects to other levels to create an impression of Tokyoto as a single connected place. This ambition does make Future show its age more than the original, but the game is fantastic nonetheless. The first reason you should play Jet Set Radio Future is because of its unparalleled style. It's bombastic, eccentric, and full of charm. The characters all dress in exaggerated 90s fashion, some Western and some Asian inspired. The music isn't just background music, it's being played to you on the radio by DJ Professor K. DJ Professor K himself takes more of a role in the story this time, and he's as outrageous and lovable as ever. Everything in Jet Set Radio bleeds style. It's true of the original, and it's true here. The iconic cel-shaded art style, the music, the characters, and even the storytelling. The story here isn't any more coherent than the original, but it definitely feels like it's got more soul. It uses graffiti and skating to touch on themes like the importance of art in self-expression, as well as the dangers of corporate censorship. I'm not going to pretend that this game has an amazing story or anything, but it does contribute to the style. The best way to understand what I'm talking about is to look at Jet Set Radio's influence on its fans. From amazing fan albums like Too Mellow's Memories of Tokyoto, or full-on revivals like the upcoming Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. Jet Set Radio fans are some of the most passionate I've ever seen for anything, not just a game series. It may have been over 20 years since the last installment, but the spirit of Jet Set Radio lives on wherever you look. It would be remiss of me to not talk about Future's soundtrack. Although it's not quite as common to hear songs from Future compared to the original, it still has a fantastic soundtrack. Some of my favourites include The Concept of Love, Funky Dealer, Rockin' the Mic, and Technopathetic. There's a lot to love on this soundtrack, as well as some tracks I personally dislike. Future's soundtrack is more varied than the original, so you're probably not going to like every track. The mix of hip-hop, punk, dance music, and other genres doesn't always work, but there's something in the soundtrack for everyone. Rather than being tied to specific areas like the first game, the soundtrack here changes depending on which part of the story you're in. This means that if you don't like a particular track, it's likely you won't have to listen to it too much. On the other hand, if you get stuck at one part of the game, you're going to hear the same tracks a lot. Music is subjective, so I can't tell you to like the soundtrack, but I can tell you that a lot of people do. Alongside the original, Jet Set Radio Future is widely considered to have one of the best soundtracks in gaming. The influence of Jet Set Radio is perhaps most felt in its visuals. Future looks amazing. The cel-shaded art style still looks gorgeous to this day. There's a reason so many games have tried to copy it. Unlike the original, there's no HD remaster of this game, not yet anyway, so some of the textures are a bit low resolution. Despite cel shading having grown in popularity, Future remains distinctive visually. It's not just the cel shading that gives Jet Set Radio its look, but its design as well. Future presents a vision of Tokyo as an urban jungle that's as grimy as it is majestic. From beautiful neon skylines, gritty sewers, and bustling shopping districts, Tokyoto feels more like a real place here than it did in the original. Some of the areas, like Faro Park, present a sense of spectacle that wasn't present in the original. Many of the areas of the original are here as well, and I get a kick out of seeing how they fit in with the wider city. The characters' designs are all sporting huge amounts of personality, as you'd expect. Every character has an outfit to express themselves, as well as feeling like something a character in this world would be wearing. The GG still feel like members of the same gang while maintaining their own identity. I'm particularly keen on DJ Professor K's redesign here. He looks more like he fits into the world, while still maintaining the over-the-top charm of his original design. Jet Set Radio Future has a cohesive aesthetic that helps bring it to life. If you're a fan of late 90s sensibilities, you're going to love how it looks. Like the original, the gameplay of Future revolves around skating and graffiti. Graffiti in this game is a much less involved mechanic. Instead of having to perform motions, you just press the trigger to spray graffiti. Although I do prefer the motion inputs, mapping it to a single button press does help keep the flow. My only gripe is that sometimes if you're going too fast, you won't hit all of the parts of a large graffiti tag, forcing you to come back for the rest. The graffiti can be customized like in the original, and you can also draw your own. The actual movement in this game feels a lot like the original with a few small tweaks. You now have a boost that you can activate at the cost of 10 spray cans. There's not really much to talk about with that. There's a good sense of momentum across both skating and grinding. Jumping onto rails has been made more lenient, but sometimes to the point where you start grinding without meaning to. For the most part, the controls are both fluid and responsive. One major change to the gameplay is the de-emphasis of score. Score is technically still a mechanic, but it no longer matters and you're not graded into ranks. Long grind combos are much easier to do in this game, but there's less incentive to do it. Instead, the game focuses more on difficult platforming challenges. This shift in focus makes the gameplay distinct from the original. Instead of clearing levels in the fastest time with as many points as possible, the challenge instead comes from trying to get to all of the graffiti spots. Because of this, Future feels more like a traditional platformer than the original. In addition to spraying graffiti, races and tagging the backs of rival gangs, there are a few new gameplay types in this game. Some of them, like Capture the Flag and Deathball, are just shoehorned in from the new Versus mode. Deathball in particular feels underdeveloped. You're given a whole passing tutorial beforehand, but you never need to pass the ball. In reality, Deathball is a set of 4 of the easiest races in the game, all on the same track. The main new gameplay type is the combat. Although you could spray enemies to take them out in the original, here the gameplay stops when you encounter enemies and you can't carry on with the level until you take them all out. For me, the combat slowed down the pace and was more frustrating than fun. Doubly so when you go to an area to fight a boss, then after the boss you go around the same area to do the graffiti spots. It would be less frustrating if you could do the graffiti at the same time as the combat. These new modes are underdeveloped, and to be honest, they feel like padding. Where this game suffers compared to the original is with its scope. It's an ambitious sequel, and as a result it misses more often than the original. Future has higher highs but lower lows. On the bright side, the levels are much more varied than the originals, and the rival gang fights are much improved. These fights now take place on dedicated levels, and they're much more enjoyable than before. A major change from the original is the removal of discrete levels. Instead of a level select, Future has a pseudo-open world. The levels in the world are interconnected, and often to get to one you'll need to travel through a few others. There are pros and cons to this. On the upside, it creates the illusion of Tokyoto as a single connecting place. These levels aren't just selected on a screen, they're places that you have to travel to. You'll often travel back through areas, and sometimes you'll come back to do another task in one later. A downside of this is that it can take a while to get from one end of the map to another. There's no fast travel in this game. On your first playthrough you're probably going to get lost at least once, and time spent getting to the level rather than playing it rarely feels good. Despite this, the open world is a big part of why some people prefer this game to the original. Jet Set Radio is a game in 3 discrete acts, set in unconnected levels. Future by contrast feels like a single story in a big city. I won't go as far to say that Tokyoto feels real or alive, but it does have context to its world. The levels aren't placed randomly either. Levels with similar themes are placed together in the city. The glitzy skyscraper district being at the other end of the city to the waste treatment plants on the outskirts makes a lot of logical sense. Whether you like the shift to a pseudo-open world or not is going to come down to personal preference, but it's definitely an ambitious change for a game released in 2002. Jet Set Radio Future is a game like no other. It's ambitious for its time, and takes risks that distinguish it from the original. Having never been released outside of the original Xbox, it's definitely more obscure than the original, but that hasn't stopped it from capturing the imagination of its fans. It's a product of its time and was a massive risk. Future was a critical success, but a commercial failure, the definition of a cult game. Although a lot of people have played the original, I bet that relatively few have played Future. A shame, as this is a sequel that deserves your attention. From its peerless style, its dystopian depiction of a Tokyo ruled by corporations, to its sheer attitude, Jet Set Radio Future is a hell of a game. Unless it gets a remake, it's doomed to be playable only by emulation, and that's a terrible shame. If you're a fan of the original or simply want to experience a lost gem, you owe it to yourself to play this game. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.